Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. We want to welcome you to our presentation on the Mesoamerican Reef. We wait a bit until everybody is coming in. I see people are coming in slowly. It always takes a few minutes. And then we will get started. So for the ones of you who haven't been to one of our sessions, we have a chat box which you can use to talk to each other, introduce yourself, and you can talk to each other. Make sure you send messages to panelists and all participants. Otherwise, only we can see it and the other attendees can actually not see it, which would be a shame. Feel free to also chat privately between people. All of that is possible. If you have any questions for the presenters, please put them in the Q&A box. That just makes it a lot easier for us to see the questions and we don't have to sift through all the other messages and maybe lose your question. If you have any technical difficulties and you don't see anybody in the chat saying something about it, then that's probably only on your end. What you can do is you can log out and try to log back in to the Zoom account or to the Zoom chat. If that doesn't work, we are also live streaming on YouTube, so you can always log in there. For the beginning, I would like to know first, where are you joining from? So we can kind of get an idea of where you're from. So take the next few seconds, about half a minute, to tell us where you're from. All right, 5 more seconds. And here are the results. So we have a lot of America, but also quite a few of people from Mesoamerica, 16%. So that's really good. This session is about Mesoamerica. Lots of people from the Caribbean, followed by Europe, and a few from Asia, and a few people from other places. We don't have anybody from the Pacific Islands or Hawaii, but it's also still very early there right now. And now I also want to know which sector you are working in. So try to apply this where we kind of we have. Another 5 seconds. If you haven't voted yet, please take the time to do so. And I'm going to end the polling and share the results. Also very interesting, before we always had a lot of academia and students. We still have a lot of students, but this is the first session where conservation and management are the top participants. And we got a lot of participation from government and tourism and education and others as well, which shows that we have a lot of them here paying attention to what we want to say. So now I would like to give over to Marisol Rueda. She's the communication consultant for the Healthy Reefs Initiative. She's based in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, and she will lead through the program today.
Thank you, Francisca, and thank you to all the attendees for your interest on this webinar. Welcome to the Global Coral Reef Week. And the theme for today is solutions from the Mesoamerican Reef. I introduce the Healthy Reefs for Healthy People Director, Melanie McFeely, who will give us the welcoming remarks and a brief introduction. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. Now, can you see my screen? Yes? Okay, great. So I am Melanie McFeely, the Director of Healthy Reefs for Healthy People, and I'm a coral reef scientist with the Smithsonian Institution, and the Conservation Commons, Working Land and Seascapes is a new program. And the Mesoamerican Reef is one of our important long-term study sites where we actually integrate people and ecosystems. And this one is particularly important, including, of course, the 4 countries, Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, Honduras, over 1,000 kilometers of coastline, over 3 million residents, and 16 million visitors. And we know that this reef is critical to both ecosystem services and one of those being the economy. As we all see now with COVID shutdown, tourism is vital to the economy in this region. Here is the general overview of where we are, the Northwestern Caribbean, for those of you who aren't here with us. The Healthy Reefs Initiative is kind of a unique multi-institutional effort that began in 2004, largely focused on creating a common vision for how we describe and measure reef health, and then follow that up with regular reporting through report cards and eco audits and collaboration of all of these partners. So at the base of this is the reef monitoring and the database, which we spend a lot of time working on collaboration and getting our partners to collect data in the same way. But then through the use of these tools, we actually engage the managers, the policymakers, and with effective use of the media, we really get people talking about the reef and making the stakeholders and the political power to get things done. I think that's one of the main objectives of our group. Coming together over the years, we've produced 6 report cards down in the lower left. We have this foundational book that's available online on our website that explains the concepts of the reef health. And then we've done 3 eco audits, and we'll do another one this year. That gives you the progress on the management side. But kind of the core, this is what people think of us as doing, is going in the water and monitoring the reef, because that, you need to know what's going on under the sea to find out how your reef is doing. So this is a core premise of our work. We've got 250 people that have been trained over the last 14 years, and a database that has 256 users. You see this little logo and you see our faces of the coordinators, but this is the Healthy Reefs Initiative. It's all of these groups really working together, and you'll hear from several of our other partners that are doing the key work. Here's a little look at, you can see from our website, you can enter the database and explore. And I encourage everyone to have a look and see what's there. Our latest report card, we've got the results up here. I'm going to give you a very brief overview. This just shows you the threshold values that all of this is based on. So for example, a good reef would have at least 20% live coral cover, not over 5% fleshy macroalgae, and then those values of commercial biomass for the fish. And we rank that for everything you can see on a site-by-site basis. We track what percent of sites are in good, fair, poor condition. You can see that there in the slide. It looks more poor than good, unfortunately. But we have a large effort. There's 286 sites in this last monitoring effort that was in our latest report card. But in addition to sites, we tend to roll things up into these subregions that are more like the management zone. So you have the atolls or big blocks of the barrier reef that can be considered together, like averaging out all of the variability. We still see that in this last report card, we had only 4 of these subregions improved in health and 7 of them declined. So that's got us a bit worried. Looking a little more at the Reef Health Index, these 4 indicators that I showed you, the coral cover at this last reporting was at 19% and fleshy macroalgae at 20. And there you can see 2,300 grams of parrotfish and only 720 grams of commercial fish, that's snappers and groupers, but compared to 2016, yeah, it's the top two. The benthic stuff has actually gotten better, and the two fish have gotten worse. Those fish declines have brought down the Reef Health Index for the first time in 12 years. So you can see it was gradually increasing, and then this last time it went down. We look a little deeper into the 4 countries, and we can see that actually Belize improved and Honduras declined. Guatemala and Mexico stayed about the same in their Reef Health Index overall. We can look at management instances of what are we doing that's contributing to this. You can see Belize with the protection of parrotfish in 2009. It took a little lag. After about 5 years, fish responded. They came up, and then the macroalgae went down. That's what we want to see. We had a kind of a good situation in Honduras until recently, when social situations and political unrest kind of led to, we think, just eroded enforcement and loss of all the parrotfish that they had. So one of our main recommendations for this report card is just enforce your environmental regulations. Even having good regulations, you can have slippage when social conditions and things get difficult in these countries. So enforcing and also creating more of these replenishment zones to help those fish populations. And you'll hear more from our partners about the other work we're doing specifically on restoring herbivory. But I wanted to also mention that at the country scale, we are helping countries contribute to these sustainable development goals. And I think all of us need to kind of weave these into our work and help show that this conservation work that we do is actually helping the countries contribute to what they've committed to with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So with that, I'll just welcome the rest of our participants to come in, and please take a look at our social media and our website for more information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie. So now we are going to divide the sessions in 3 different themes. And the first one is healthy watersheds. And after each session, we will have 5 minutes for questions. So for the participants, you can type your question in the question and answer box, which is in the bottom part of your screen in the right corner. And we will have the questions for Melanie after the first session. So now I welcome Alejandra Lopez from Centinelas del Agua in Mexico with the theme Research, Education, Advocacy, and Other Novel Ways to Catalyze Actions Towards Scarce Aquifer Protection. Thank you, Alejandro.
Thank you so much, Marisol, and hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about the research, education, advocacy, and other novel ways to catalyze actions towards the scarce aquifer protection. We, as Centinelas del Agua, are part of the Healthy Reefs initiative, and we are dedicated here in the Yucatan Peninsula in the karst system to take care about the water quality and the conservation of this area. As you know, you can see here all the karst areas in Mexico, and we are here in the Yucatan Peninsula. As you know, the karst systems has different kinds of characteristics. One of them is the rapid infiltration that they have because of the rain and all the things that we do at the surface. We have a lot of threats here in the Mexican Caribbean. One of them is the wastewater that is going directly to the aquifer, and after that, obviously, it's going to the reef. So we have high vulnerability to the pollution. We have a lot of wastewater discharge, and we don't have any charge capacity of the cenotes or sinkholes that are used for the tourism sector. So we are working to have a legal framework to protect the aquifer and the water quality. This is one of the current situation that we have here in the cenotes or the lines, and this is the only freshwater resource for the Yucatan Peninsula. We can see here in the image is like a picture of the situation that we have here in the Mexican Caribbean or in the Yucatan Peninsula. As you can see, we have the forests, the mangroves, the coast, and the coral reef. And if we make the connections directly to the aquifer, it's going to get polluted, and all the pollutants are going to arrive to the reef. So we need to manage all these systems from the forest to the reef. And these main characteristics of the cenotes are a particularity from the Yucatan Peninsula, and we have to work a lot in the legal framework to protect them and to have a really integrated water management. So this is a representation of what is happening with the pollutants that goes to the aquifer and then to the reef. And we use this kind of videos to the people to give the knowledge of how to take care about it. We have seen in the water quality that we have a lot of nutrients that are arriving to the aquifer, and then we are still monitoring all of these pollutants that goes from the aquifer to the reef. So it is a really high increase in the tourism high season and a decrease of nutrients in the low season. There are a lot of reports that says that all of these nutrients that arrives to the reef, it's having a decrease of the health of the reef because of the macroalgae. So we need to stop all of this pollution. How we can stop all of this pollution? Doing the water quality monitoring networks, working on the legal framework, and doing a lot of environmental education. Nowadays, we have more or less like 100 monitoring sites in the northern coast of Quintana Roo in Mexico to monitor all the water quality. These are the parameters that we are still monitoring since 2018. We had the opportunity to monitor now in 2020 in May to see if there is any change because the low activity of the tourism. And we identified that the nutrients, it was really, really low. So we have a directly connection between the low season of tourism and the high season of tourism. And it is affecting the water quality in the reef too. Here are some of the models that we are working on. This is in northern Quintana Roo in the Holbox area. And we can see that nutrients goes really high in the areas near to the urban areas. This is one of the pictures of the students that we take to the caverns, because this is the only way that they can get more awareness about what they have in their field and how they can protect the aquifer and all the water and how they can prevent all the pollution in the area. We are working with the government to increase the water treatment plants here in the Mexican Caribbean to improve the water quality of the aquifer and the coral reefs. And this is one of the reports of the UN of Water that says that for every $1 spent at sanitation, the estimated return to society is about $5.5 US. So we need to work with the government, with the local authorities, with the civil society, and with the citizens to get an integrated coastal karst aquifer management. And if we can get this, we can improve the health of the reef because it is the connection between the water quality and the health of the reef. So nowadays we have been working in the legal framework because there is no any recognition about the karst system in the Mexican laws. So we have been working to strengthen the regulation of capes, to have the instruments that allow the conservation and sustainable use of them, the distribution of powers between the different governments, the federal governments, municipality governments, etc., and the inspection and surveillance regime, the imposition of security measures, and where appropriate administrative sanctions that are applicable in case of non-compliance. So we launched an initiative in collaboration with Healthy Reefs and SEMDA in this year to give the knowledge to the people and to the citizens about the human rights to water, to sanitation, and to a health environment. And by this way, they can know more about how they can ask to the government and to the civil society to protect everything. And nowadays we have been getting two more regulations at the local levels to the protection of the karst system and the cenotes. What we do with the research, we take all the results and we go to with the government to give them all the results. and to start to work in an initiative that can strengthen all the regulations and the framework. We have been working on education too, with experiential tours and environmental workshops with the students. Last year, we took more than 6,000 students into the caves. And for more of them, it was the first time to know one of the caves and the cenotes. And it was really an amazing experience for them. More of them now are studying something related to the science as biologists, environmental engineers, ecologists, etc. And with the environmental education, the research, we go to do some of the advocacy to have the local regulations and at the federal law. And by this way, we are going to move into the conservation from the aquifer to the reef, which are the future plans and opportunities that we have now in this area. We have to engage more youth in water conservation. We need a new water law in Mexico to recognize the water community integrated management. We need to have a regional strategy of the watershed integrated management of the Mesoamerican Reef system in Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, and Mexico, related to the protection of the Mesoamerican Reef system. We need to spread the SDGs and be the voice of whom can't, in this case of all the ecosystems. We need to promote the tertiary wastewater treatment in the Mexican Caribbean, and we need to promote hydrogeological reserves to protect the water and their associated ecosystems. So we need a lot of work to do, and we are working on it. And the only way to get the conservation from the aquifer to the reef is with an integrated water management. So in this case, we are working on environmental education, in scientific research, and in the advocacy levels, because it's like the bridge from the science to the legal framework. And it is one of the things that it is working on here in Mexico and is helping us to protect and to preserve all the coral reef system in this area. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Coral Reefs for the invitation to this presentation.
Thank you, Alejandro, for sharing us all the great work you do. So now I welcome the speakers, Jenni Myron from Coral Reef Alliance and my colleague Ian Drysdale from the Healthy Reefs Initiative, with the theme Improving Water Quality through Wastewater Management on an Island Community and Options to Expand in the Mesoamerican Reef. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. We're going to do our presentation in tandem, so please forgive us if we get a little bit mixed up. We're very passionate about this.
Let's begin with a little bit of history on how we got involved in managing water and wastewater in the small community of West End, where we live. We don't know since when the water board before us started, but until about 2005, when we got involved, the community was not really happy with how water was being managed in our community. So we had a little coup d'etat, if you want to call it that, where the community a new management came in and a new water board was created. Actually, a legal water board was created. So far, we have been involved for about 15 years in the water management of our small town here in West End.
And something that Ian's mentioning is very important, because before, you have to have a management model that actually is functional. And the Honduran law allows you to have water boards. And a water board legally is only allowed to manage water and sanitation. No other uses can be done with any funds that are recovered from potable water use. And this is key because many locations around Honduras, what is happening is that community councils or patronatos are managing water. And then when funding comes in, it's distributed for other needs. There are always many needs for the community, but having a management model that only allows funding that comes in to be redistributed into the system allows for a sustainable model management.
And as you can see, a lot of water boards don't actually become legal because it's really complicated. It took us 4 years to get all the legal paperwork in order to become a legally established water board. So a lot of communities don't even want to go through the hassle of doing that and of becoming a legal entity.
And again, this is thinking about that long term, just as Alejandro before us was mentioning how sewage is affecting the reef and why it's one of the most important things. In order for the communities to really get behind sewage and sanitation, you have to work with them and you have to think of the long game. And so the first part is actually having good potable water. And one of the ways that you can do this, the first important, is to actually have measurement of the water so that you can actually establish a tariff system. And very interesting what happened when we established a tariff system. In general, the use of water within the community was reduced by 25%. Before, that means that there was extra 25% being wasted. So people fixed their leaks because they knew they were paying for water.
So once you have a water meter and you can charge people by how much water they use, is when we reached out to this entity in the Honduran government that helps water boards in the whole country manage themselves. And thanks to them, we were able to be within the legal framework of how to create this fee. It's not just that I think, oh, water should be so much. It's a really complicated and convoluted study where you have to look of what your costs are, what your operational fees are monthly, and also be able to save enough money to have in case of emergency or hurricanes, for example, and also in order to expand the system. There's always things that break down. There's always a new house that gets built or a new business that gets installed. Then you have to be able to expand your water system to fit the needs of these other new users. And here's an example of our current water fee. And it's broken down basically into two segments: residential use and and non-residential or business use. And as you can see, it's based on how much water you use. The less water you use, the cheaper your water is. The more water you use, the more expensive your water becomes per cubic meter. And that is a way of fostering people using less water. Mm-hmm. As you can understand, we live on an island where potable water is a very limited resource.
And just to mention what, as you can see, you're not only having charges for potable water, but you're also having charges for sewage treatment, and that's combined into the bill. And that's really important because that's really one of the only ways we can ensure that communities will pay for sewage if it's combined with the water bill.
And of course, you have to build trust. You have to have some form of transparency. Back when the water board began, there was the administrator who would go house to house every month collecting a flat fee before we had the water meters. And that doesn't really create a lot of trust with people. So we decided to move forward and actually open bank accounts now that we were a legal entity, and people pay at the bank, just like you pay for your cell phone, for your internet, for other expenses in your home or in your business. We decided that the best way forward was to have people pay at the bank. And we now have bank accounts in actually 4 banks where people come and pay for their monthly water bill. Again, that way, nobody within the water board touches any kind of cash. We have a customer service office, but we won't receive any kind of payment there at all. Our books are open all the time, completely open. People can come into our office and say, I want to see how much money we received and spent in, March of 2014, and we will be able to show them that information. Mm-hmm. And at the end of every year, at the end of every fiscal year, we have a third-party entity that audits us. So we are able to be transparent, and then that information is shared with our community. And of course, if you are part of the board of directors, you don't get any salary or any benefits. We all pay as normal citizens within this community.
So part of the investment that's in is, again, invested into community. And so this water board has been able to buy land around the wells. We do not have any freshwater sources or land sources like rivers for water. We have to collect. Everything is pumped out. So we're trying to protect the land around the wells so that we can ensure sustainability in the long term for water.
And again, you have to treat this as a business. It's not to make money, but it's the only way to be sustainable is to treat this as a business. So we now have a customer service office in our community where people can voice their concerns or come. We will take payment through credit cards at the office. For example, if you have a leak, we will help you fix it. You can come in and check the books every month. And of course, we have to be up to date with the tax man. Although water does not pay taxes, we still need to report how much money comes in and how much money is spent, so that we are audited as a business, and we have to be transparent.
So, as I was mentioning, this is a really long process, and management is key. West End used to have, the community that we're talking about used to have just a dirt road, and the community loved its dirt road. The municipality wanted to pave it. There was a lot of pushback. But we were able, with the community, to work with the mayor and say, okay, if you want to pave the road, it's okay, only if you build us a water treatment system. At that time, everybody just had septic systems. And you know that the septic systems with the high water tables are going to be, leaching out into the ocean. And so everybody was sort of aware of this. And that was the way that we were able to negotiate to get a sewage treatment system.
And once the plant was built, we were looking within the community and figuring out that we did not have the expertise to manage a treatment plant. None of us within the community knows or is a sanitation engineer. So we decided to think outside the box, and we hired another company, actually the company that built the treatment plant, to now manage it for the community. So it's not the responsibility of the water board. It's actually, that responsibility falls on a private company that gets paid monthly to do this. And these people have the expertise to do these kind of things.
And the water board then just becomes an oversight committee. And this is also something very new within the country, that actually people now are following suit on this. But then again, we're reef lovers. Why do we really care about sewage and sanitation? And why are we talking about water and spending so much or investing so much time in ensuring that we have a potable water system that's working? Well, this is one of the reasons why. As you see in the last report card, Honduras is coming out pretty bad in relation to macroalgae cover. And if you remember the slide that Alejandro showed with all of the fuzzy macroalgae, that's a result of nutrients in the water.
But what we can show with our data is having a good, well-managed treatment plant reduces that load. So here you can see the data of 2013, when we first started using the treatment plant, and how the Enterococcus levels have gone down. So that means that we are not polluting our surrounding waters. And it's not us that do these tests. We have an entity called BICA, the Bay Islands Conservation Association, and they do the water testing for us. So we are not, we're not judge and jury, but we have a third person, a third entity doing this for us.
And BICA has been a key collaborator in all of this. And in fact, they've been so important that they've been building their own laboratory and now are able to do a series of suites of different types of water quality analysis. And I just want you to look again at that chart. If you see the red dotted line, that is having EPA passing standards and Cartagena Convention passing standards. Look how long it took us to actually get to connecting those standards, because the municipality built the treatment plant, but they did not connect any of the homes.
So it was up to the water board to start looking for funding and looking to see how we can connect the rest of the community. When the treatment plant was built, there was about 12% of the community was connected. We have now reached 98% of the community. We have had to build more infrastructure, more pipes, more main lines in order to reach a larger portion of our community. And there have been amazing results. Based on the chart that we saw in the slide before, we were able to start applying for the Blue Flag Beach Program. And it has been awarded to West End, to the West End community, and it's the only populated beach on Roatan that has this award. The other beach that has this award is about 2 hours away from here by car, and there's only 4 houses on it. This one is a community of about 4,000 people, and we are able to say our water is clean, so please come and swim in our ocean.
But here's the important part. It's not just about human health. Sometimes we have to use a human health card to get other decision makers to think that this is important and invest. But in reality, we're thinking about coral reefs. And in the areas that are in the influence of the sewage treatment plant that has now clean water, you actually see a decrease of up to nothing in diseases on corals. And this is something that's really, really important. And so this is why it's so important to continue this work in not only this little community, but in the rest of the islands and the region.
So again, as Jenni was saying, we did not have enough infrastructure to reach out to our entire community. And over the years, we have been able to raise around $220,000 in various projects from several different funders in order to either change a pump or create a new pumping station or create new pipes, new lines, installing more water meters in order to reach a higher percentage of our community. And we were able to do that through the transparency, through the trust that we built in managing a water board in such a transparent way. And then we can actually go out and knock on doors and say, hey, please give us funding. We can manage it adequately. So up to date, we have connected 97% of our businesses, and we have treated 150 million gallons of sewage or 435 million liters of rum so far.
But we really interrupt, but you already passed the 10 minutes. If you can wrap up, the bell is not making the sound.
Perfect, thank you. So we have to think, this is, I think, one of the last slides. We really have to think and scale this up. So we've been able to have really good results in one small town, but how do we get this across the region? And the way we're doing this is, one, you have to have really good data. Then two, you have to have a team that's willing to work together, because this has got to be in the agenda of not only our government, but all the regional governments, all of the ODAs, and all of the organizations that collaborate with us.
And thank you for your time. That's our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Okay, so this is the end of the first session. So now I will open the answer some questions. So I have two questions for Melanie. The first one, Melanie, is it possible to volunteer with the Healthy Reefs for Healthy People initiative? And who becomes or who goes to the monitoring training?
Okay, so volunteers, yes, you would have to contact the national coordinator. So in each country, there's a coordinator. Ian is the one for Honduras, and you can look on our website and find out whichever country you are in. If you're not in the Mesoamerican Reef, then, we have had students internationally come down and they have to, finance their own way and everything. So it might be also a little difficult now with COVID, but contact, one of the coordinators to kind of follow up on that, depending on which country you would want to be in. And then the other question about the people that get the training, that's the ones that are have jobs in the field. So they work with our partner organizations, and for them, sometimes they're a student in one of the 4 countries, and they have the ability to get out into the field, and their job may be as a park biologist or a biologist for an NGO or doing outreach, and they will be in this role for a while. So we just don't want to train people who monitor once and leave and we never see them again.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. And there's another question for you. Would it be possible if another country in the Caribbean region following the same protocol of data than yours to present the results in your web page, or at least to have some link between the web pages of the parks to see the whole region under the same reference?
Yes, and for that, I think that, AGRA, the Atlantic and Gulf Rapid Reef Assessment Group, is working on a web platform that will have the whole Caribbean. So whoever is asked that question, you could follow up with me, and we might get a conversation with Patricia Kramer and look at when their new website is going to launch. But they've kind of taken the same thresholds and, work together, and there will be report card. There have been report cards in 10 other countries in the Caribbean. So we do need to pull this all together, and that is an active area that we're working on.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I typed the email from Melanie, so you can email her. And the next question will be for Alejandro. So Alejandro, beyond water quality, is there any evidence of coral reef decline that you can attribute to the effects of global stressors, for example, climate change?
Yes, one of them, it was the bleaching that is related directly to the temperature rise. But nowadays, the main issue that we have to the coral reef is the stony coral tissue loss disease, that it has been affected in the last 3 years to the coral reef. And it has been a lot of research about it. Probably it's because of bacteria, but it is still being studied. So, for example, this kind of disease has spread a lot in the Mesoamerican Reef Caribbean. And I think that the only way that we have to take action urgent is the best management and the best practices in the wastewater treatment plants, and to still doing a lot of research to stop this disease here in the Mexican Caribbean and all the region of the Mesoamerican Reef.
Thank you, Alejandro. And now the following questions are for Jenni and Ian in Honduras. Who paid for the wastewater treatment plant installation in West End?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, that was a combination of the municipal funds and Zolitur funds. So both two government entities, a local and two local government entities. But as we were mentioning, they're only paid for the construction of the treatment plant and the main pipe. Every connection had, every home or business had to connect to that main pipe. And that's something that's very normal when you're building these bigger systems. I mean, even when the IDB has built systems, we've had systems in, even in the islands that have been built in 2000, and you only have 13% connection because you build it, but they don't connect. And so that's one of those follow-up things that's really important to ensure, or there's no real reason of building millions of dollars in a plant.
Thank you. And there's another question from Maya as well. Is there any consideration for recovery or resources from wastewater so no point discharges happen?
Yes, we have thought about it. It's a little bit complicated. There's a lot of expenses involved. One of the things that we're moving towards is using the activated sludge or the organic material that comes out. It looks like mud, and actually use it to create compost. There's a few considerations you need to take into account because it cannot come in touch with food or plants that you're going to eat. And another thing that we're raising funds with the Water Board and through Coral Reef Alliance is to create this artificial wetland. There used to be mangroves in the point of discharge, and now those are all gone and homes are there. But we want to be able to purchase a piece of land and actually create an artificial wetland with mangroves so that all the water that comes out of the treatment plant will then be absorbed and recycled and upcycled within a natural environment.
Thank you, Ian. We have a last question from Phil Karp. What is the structure of the contract with the technical firm that is operating the water treatment plant? Is it a concession agreement or a technical services contract? And if the latter, is it tied in any way to performance?
It's a technical services contract. They are the only company on the island where we live that can actually do this. So it was really hard to tie it to performance. Because we are a tourist destination, it fluctuates a lot. We have high seasons, we have low seasons, and it was very hard to tie them to how well the plant operates because there will be so many different variables. But we're actually very happy with the development and how they've been managing it for us. And we're going to continue working with this company.
Okay, and then a very last question from Leona Kustra. Does the treatment plant service a large geographic area, for example, the whole island?
No, it does not. It's only one community. And that's why it's so important that we need to spread and scale up. I mean, the last report card showed that in Honduras, only 1.8% of all of coastal communities have water treatment. 45% in Mexico, 2.3% in Belize, and 8% in Guatemala. If you're thinking about that, just think of the scope. There is a lot of sewage going into our oceans, a lot of sewage going into our tourism beaches, and we really have to start scaling and making this a priority.
Okay. Very last question, so we go to the second session. This is for Ian from Valerie. Is the cost for water higher for hotel? Is it come into commercial sector?
Yes, of course. If there's any kind of business, it can be a hotel, it can be a bed and breakfast, you can have a little dive shop. Every business has, they fall within the business type of connection, and their water is more expensive because they're actually benefiting from it. They're actually making a business out of it. Homes have a much lower monthly rate.
Okay, thank you. And just Ana Iranzo wants to congratulate you guys for this wonderful project. She's from Venezuela.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are heading to our next theme, healthy fisheries. And for that, I will present my colleague from Guatemala, Ana Giro, from the Healthy Reefs for Healthy People initiative, with the theme, Tools to Improve Fisheries, Connectivity, and Biodiversity, moving towards the 20% full protection Mesoamerican Reef wide goal. Thank you, Ana.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So today I'm going to talk about tools to improve fisheries, connectivity, and biodiversity, moving towards the 20% full protection wide goal. And Medina is sharing my screen because I had trouble with my computer. So thanks, Medina, for doing that. So sustaining connectivity. So mangrove, seagrass, reef connectivity to support biodiversity, ecosystem integrity, and biological life cycles is critical. In the MAR region, in the Mesoamerican Reef region, we have lost more than 20% of mangroves since in the 90s, so 1990. And we need mangroves to maintain this connectivity between the different ecosystems. So this is so important. And the main threats to this loss and to the MAR region as well is the coastal development, pollution, overfishing, and climate change as well. So in the diagram below, we can see how mangroves, seagrass, and coral reefs are linked all together to support and maintain important species. Here we see the grouper life cycle, where we have like the post-larvae that settle in the shallow nearshore areas. We have juveniles that develop and grow in the mangroves and seagrasses. Then the adults that live and grow on the reefs, but then we also have the adults migrating long distances to specific sites to spawn. And well, they form fish spawning aggregations in this particular sites. So next. So fish spawning aggregations. So why are they important? Well, basically they're important because fish spawning aggregations are sites where a single or a multi-species of fish gather together in greater densities than normal to reproduce. So they gather by the hundreds or the thousands in this specific areas, and they are predictable. So we basically know when they gather, they gather at the same time and place each year. So for groupers, it's from December to March, and for snappers, it's from April to June. And because they are predictable, this means that they are more vulnerable to overfishing while they're spawning. So this is why it's important to protect fish spawning aggregations to maintain all the connectivity that we've been talking about. Next. So one of the species that aggregate to spawn are the Nassau groupers, and they're actually now in a critical endangered species. From our surveys done in 2018 and the data that we published in our report card in 2020, we have seen that the average size of the Nassau groupers was of 38 centimeters across the whole Mesoamerican Reef. Just keep in mind that they reach sexual maturity at 48 centimeters and they become mega spawners at more than 80 centimeters. So this means that they are in danger. So we have big fish that have bigger risks. And also here, it's some data on that in 2007, the approximately 35% of the Nassau groupers counted at the northeast point of the Glover's Reef Marine Reserve were mega spawners, and this number declined. It has dropped to 5% in 2009. So we don't have much time series of data on fish spawning aggregations, but where we do have the data and it's good data, it doesn't look good for spawning fish. So we need to keep that in mind. So next. So what we can do, the main actions needed to sustain fish spawning aggregations is to restore key habitats like mangroves, seagrasses, and coral reefs, engage communities about the importance and vulnerability of fish spawning aggregations, coordinate regional monitoring to track status of fish spawning aggregations, adopt size limits and close seasons during spawning season. This is at a national level, but also at a regional level on policies. This needs to, we checked all the national policies and then the regional policies, and it's not accurate to, we need to move along the whole region in order to adopt these size limits and also close seasons for this particular species, like groupers and snappers. And we need to protect fish spawning aggregations by establishing replenishment zones. So these are replenishment zones means like no take zones. Next. So we're going to be focusing now on the protection of fish spawning aggregation sites in the Mar. And it was actually Belize that led the protection of fish spawning aggregations in the Mar region. In 2003, Belize was the first country to protect fish spawning aggregation sites. Now they currently have 13 sites that are verified and that are protected. Mexico has 5 FSA sites verified and protected. Honduras has 4 FSA sites that are verified and also protected. So these are some actions that we've been working on the Mesoamerican Reef. So next. So we need to build sustainable fisheries for the future. So this can be done by ensuring connectivity through the creation of replenishment zones on key ecosystems and habitats. So we've talked about the creation of replenishment zones on fish spawning aggregation sites, but we also need to link other habitats such as coral reefs, for example. We need to ensure connectivity within coral reefs and mangroves, and by establishing replenishment zones, which are no-take zones on these key ecosystems, we are able to replenish the area, so we have more fish in these areas, and which they will eventually spill over to other areas. So this is also important to create. So next. So we know that replenishment zones are working in the Mar. Replenishment zones equal more and bigger fish. These graphs are from our 2018 report card, where we compared the different zones linked, like for example, we have the no fishing zones, which are the replenishment zones. We have the general use zones, which are marine protected areas, and the fish zones, which are the areas that are completely open for fishing. So these are outside of MPAs. What we are seeing in both commercial and herbivorous fish biomass is that the replenishment zones have more fish. Next. So if we focus on commercial fish, which are mainly groupers and snappers, we see that the fished zones have 1.4 mature fish per site. The general use zones have 1.5 mature fish per site, and the replenishment zones have 6.4 mature fish per site. So this actually is working. So tools to restore fish populations in the Mar. So what are we doing to help bring fish back? We're doing all this in the Mar region. We are doing transboundary collaboration. We have provided alternatives, incomes for fishers, involving communities we need to involve the communities also in all of the management and projects, the managed access for all fisheries. And our next presentation, Isabel is going to be talking about managed access in Belize. So we also are promoting sustainably caught seafood, protecting fish spawning sites, conduct consistent monitoring and research, because we need the research and the monitoring to lead the management of the sites, safeguarding critical nurseries and feeding habitats, and also protecting parrotfish and grazers along the Mesoamerican Reef, and also replenishment zones, establishing replenishment zones as well.
Anna, you have 1 minute left. The bell is not working, so sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay. So basically here we have another tool that we need to focus on, and it's improving market supply chains to increase benefits for fishers. So we need to also focus on this as well. So next. Awareness and enforcement for regulations, education, and working together with fishermen is also key. Here we have the responsible seafood guides. And next, Marina. So I wanted to highlight that we manage human behaviors and not reefs. So this is also important to keep in mind. Next. So moving towards the 20% full protection of the MAR-wide goal, here we have a table where we have the current levels of management and marine protection. And I wanted basically to highlight and also the replenishment zones national commitments. And if you click one more time, Melina. We have now we have Guatemala that has been rising that number, and we have 13.1% for Guatemala, and the whole MAR region, it's 5.6%. Next. So we're still far away from hitting the 20% full protection of the MAR-wide goal, but I mean, we're getting there. More countries are increasing their area of no-take zones as well. Next. So increasing the area's full protection yields more fish and healthier reefs as well. Next. We have regional collaboration. This slide was shown by Melanie as well. So we are doing regional monitoring and data sharing through the MAR Data Explorer. So this is accessible data in a user-friendly format that we have along the Mesoamerican Reef. And next, and also the regional networks in the MAR. So we have many regional networks like the Sustainable Fisheries Network, the MARFISH Network, the Mangrove and Seagrass Network, and the Reef Restoration Network. So we're all working together to recommend and to do the follow-up on protecting the Mesoamerican Reef. And thank you.
Thank you, Ana. So now I welcome Isabel Martinez from the Belize Fisheries Department with the theme Belize Managed Access, Lessons and Results from a Bold National Fisheries Policy. And for the speakers, the bell is not working, so sorry, I will interrupt you 2 minutes before you end up your time. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you, Marisol. So hi, good morning, everybody. Isabel Martinez from Fisheries Department. It's good to be here to share with you the work we've been doing with Managed Access in Belize. Just to provide some context, some of the main characteristics of the fishing industry in Belize is artisanal, small scale, employs approximately 2,826 fishermen. We only have artisanal small scale fishing, and the capture fisheries sector contributes to 32.3 million and 3% of the, approximately 3% of the GDP, and about 15,000 Belizeans benefit from fishing activities. So the way we have it here, fishers are licensed to do commercial fishing, and the vessels that they use are also licensed. And the focus is primarily on the spiny lobster, queen conch, on finfish, and in past years, to some extent, a limited entry fishery was a sea cucumber. What are some of the sectoral challenges? I won't go into detail with this because I think we have a lot of the same challenges in the MAR region and in other regions as well: IUU fishing, climate change, and coastal poverty in coastal communities. In terms of the fishery framework we have in Belize, so basically what you see here are the three main pillars for fisheries management in Belize. We have the Fisheries Act, which provides Belize for the legal framework to implement our management measures. We also have a marine reserve network, and the marine reserves are here. We use them as fishery management tools so the marine reserves are of multiple use. You have general use areas along with no-take areas. And that does a role of protecting important habitat, supporting biodiversity and rebuilding fisheries. Along with that, we have complementing all of these things, this program called Manage Access. So that looks at area-based management and allocation of licenses and incentives for fishers to be better stewards of the resource. So Manage Access was implemented here in Belize at the beginning at 2 pilot sites in 2011. Initially, a scoping process was done to establish and identify establish the Manage Access program in these 2 places and these 2 marine reserves. So we have Glover's Reef and Port Honduras. They were sites that were very different in terms of size, in terms of the stakeholders that use the area, in terms of the dynamic of fishing within those 2 different sites. But what they had in common is that you had the users, the stakeholders of those areas had been calling for some sort of management measure like Manage Access for some time before it was done. And so the success of the pilot sites is what gave way to the national rollout. The national rollout was guided by the success of the pilot sites. What we saw at the pilot sites at the time was that violations of fishery regulations had decreased significantly, infractions had decreased significantly. We had the fishermen at the sites reporting higher catches, and fishermen were also submitting catch data. They were filling out logbooks and submitting catch data. That was the first time that was happening here in Belize. And so the socioeconomic information that we gathered in the years following the implementation of the pilot site showed significant support for the program. The strategy that Manage Access has used is it has strengthened management through a national system of secure tenure for fishers to fish in designated fishing areas. It has also looked at improving livelihoods, empowering fishers through community-based management, and very importantly, use a national multi-stakeholder approach, which has included government over time, fishermen, and NGOs to be able to analyze and recommend policies. And so if you look at the picture below, you see that there are different NGOs and fishermen groups mentioned, along with the Fisheries Department. That is the Manage Access Working Group, which is a body, again, a multi-stakeholder body that led the design of the program of how it would work, especially for national rollout. And so everybody had great input. We had from fisheries, we had from NGOs, and it was led by the government. If you look at this slide here, it shows the Manage Access components. They're there in the form of gears, as they all have worked together to have the machine running. If you had one of the components struggling, then you would see the effect in the other areas. One of the main ones has been licensing and allocation. We've included a lot of work in our licensing database in ensuring that fishers, are licensed, that their vessels are licensed. And we've also had the community-based committees, Manage Access committees per fishing area. So these committees have been vital in providing feedback for management of these areas, assisting with vetting of licenses in the past, and with making recommendations in terms of enforcement and so on in the area. We've also had the monitoring and catch logs. Like I mentioned before, fishers are directly submitting catch data, filling out and submitting catch data. And of course, we've had the scientific assessments and adaptive management framework, as the science is very important, is a very important component. We've had community education outreach, and We've had a lot of voluntary compliance, especially in the pilot site stage, and in improvements in enforcement, where we've also used a very collaborative approach with other partners and other enforcement entities like the Coast Guard and the police. We had an extensive social marketing campaign. This has been one of the biggest contributors to the success of the program. After the pilot sites worked well and it was determined that there was going to be a national rollout, we had to do a lot of, this was parallel to the consultation process that fed the design of the program. This was an entire socialization, social marketing campaign where we did 3 years of stakeholder outreach and engaged all fishing communities. We did an entire branding. If you look at the logo there, Sustainable Fishing for Our Future, to come up with the logo, we had a mascot. We worked in all of the communities. We did surveys, focus groups, workshops, meetings, you name it, and got a lot of support and involvement from the fishing communities and the fishing groups.
Isabel, you have 2 more minutes.
So the expansion here, showing the different fishing areas, took a lot of work. It looks like an easy map, but those show you the fishing areas. And so it took a lot of consultation. Fishers have access to fish in 2 fishing areas, and then additionally in area 9 for deep sea fishing. So if you look at it, it overlaps with the pre-existing marine reserve networks. And what that does is that managed access puts structure in place. It allows us to know who is fishing where. And so it also allows us in that regard to be able to make area-based management decisions. We're now also moving towards having species-specific licenses. The biggest results from all of this have been increased stewardship as well. If you look at the expansion, again, fishing is a right, but it's also a responsibility. And this has been one of the biggest things for managed access. Fishers have the right to fish. They have access to fish. We're managing the access, but they have access to fish, and they have to comply and have these things in place. And some of these things include that they have to fish within the designated fishing areas that they're allocated. And they also need to have their vessels need to be marked to identify them with the fishing area. If you look at the color-coded map below, and they need to submit catch data as well. This slide here just summarizes everything and the way managed access has worked. You have licenses allocated to a specific area. You have monitoring and enforcement within the area. Like I mentioned, within the larger managed access areas, you have many times marine reserves. And so you have, therefore, fishery replenishment zones, the no-take areas. All of this coupled with sound science and community capacity building. What have been some of the challenges? Of course, the legal framework, when you're talking about scaling up for the pilot sites, we were able to implement managed access based on, because it was at 2 marine reserves, the marine reserves are governed by a statutory instrument that allowed for the access to be managed to the reserve. But looking at it, when we were rolling out nationally, we literally had to change the approach because now we had to design how we would have the areas gazetted. So we had to have the areas gazetted that needed a lot of political will and support to have that taken to cabinet, have it approved, and then for it to be gazetted. Also, the legal framework, the Fisheries Act, which allows for a lot of things that we do, was under a revision process for a long time, and we waited about 10 years for it to be approved. Just recently, the revised fisheries bill was passed. Resources, like in everything, human and financial, are a limitation. The institutionalization, how do we move from this not being seen just as a project and now something that the department does and a program that is here to stay? Just recently, we got a budget approved for the program, a budget that comes from the government. Before that, we had been using funding from partners like the Environmental Defense Fund and WCS. Also, compliance and enforcement, again, the limitation of human and financial resources. I think just to close off, some of the best results we've gotten from managed access: increased stewardship, better participation from the communities, and like I mentioned, the ability now to do better area-based management decisions. And so one of the special things, one of the beauties of Managed Access has been that we've used a very adaptive approach. We've had to have adaptive management because here, when we design a program, you realize that you have to adapt it to where you're doing it. And we're actually one of the few, if not only, country that have been doing our rights-based approach at a national level for our entire territorial waters. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel. So now we have some minutes for questions. I see two. One is from Isabel, from Neus. What has worked and what hasn't regarding compliance and enforcement?
Okay, so for compliance and enforcement, we've had, for example, the color coding. We haven't had a lot of pushback with it. Like I said, the increased stewardship allowed for people to want to have the color coding for their vessels because they felt that identified them with their areas. And also, one of the challenges, though, for enforcing these things would be like the catch log books. That has been one of the challenges, to get everybody to fill out the catch log books and to be consistent with it. More than filling it out, to be consistent with it over time. Also, of course, you still have the usual challenges in terms of enforcement, following the fisheries regulations, size limits, fishing within season, transboundary fishing. But the increased stewardship has helped a lot in the sense that people tend to be more protective of the area in which they fish. So there's a lot of like self-policing in that sense.
Thank you, Isabel. The following question is for you and for Anna as well, from Phil Carp. Have there been issues of enforcement of managed access in areas close to national borders, for example, Zapodilla Keys Marine Reserve, and therefore accessible to fishers from neighboring countries? How is this addressed? So this one is for Isabel and for Anna.
Okay, so for managed access, well, we are at the north, we have the boundary of Mexico-Belize, and then down south, we have the boundary of Belize-Guatemala. Of course, transboundary fishing has always been a challenge, but like I mentioned, one of the things that helps us, for example, when I think about down south, is especially color coding with the boats. The boats that are Belizean vessels can be identified by the color coding. So enforcement-wise, our officers are able to see whenever a vessel does not look familiar to the area. Given that there's still, like I mentioned, sometimes it still does happen, but there tends to be more self-policing, like I said, in terms of fishers would be reporting if they see a foreign vessel nearby.
Okay, I have one more for Isabel and one for Anna. So for Isabel from Antonella Rivera, thanks for the presentation. It is very interesting. Does the Fisheries Act provide a legal framework for fisheries co-management? Specifically, does it indicate the rights and responsibilities for each fisher and/or fishers association within the managed access zones? If so, how long did this process take?
Could you repeat the last part after co-management?
Yeah, how specifically does it indicate the rights and responsibilities for each fisher and/or fishers association within the managed access zones? And if so, how long did this process take?
Right, so in Belize, we have a co-management system. Some of the areas that you look at, if you look, I showed you the map, it overlaps. Let me just show you. So the map basically shows you that the areas you have an overlap in terms of the pre-existing marine reserves and the larger fishing area. So we have a total of 9 marine reserves, and from those, 5 are managed directly by the Fisheries Department and the others are co-managed. We don't have a system where we have co-management with fishers. The co-management happens with NGOs. And so basically, yes, we have something in place for the reserves within there, have something in place that allows for co-management. The co-managers also have a responsibility in terms of reporting to the Fisheries Department as the main authority in terms of management. And then there tends to be good collaboration in that regard. In terms of fisheries complying, it's stated as a condition of their license. When fisheries are given their license, the Fisheries Department and the Fisheries Administrator have the authority to assign conditions to the license. And so the catch date and the color coding and all of these things that you hear are conditions of their license.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. And the last question for Ana from Isabel Socolo. So Ana, when you say these fish aggregation sites have been protected, is the protection effective, or do fishermen still fish in these areas?
Oh yeah, it depends. I mean, enforcement of regulations is still an issue in some areas. So we need to keep in mind that we not only need to protect the FSAs, which are really important, but also fish aggregate to spawn in these areas, but then they return to the coral reefs to live. So we also have to protect those sites as well. Yeah, we have seen a drop in numbers in many of the fish spawning aggregation sites along the Mesoamerican Reef. So yes, enforcement is still an issue. I think awareness and education is vital as well. I don't know, Isabel, if you have something else to add for Belize.
I would agree with you that, again, outreach and awareness and education would have to do a lot with the success of what you do.
Well, thank you, Ana and Isabel, for your presentations. And now we are going to the last session. The theme is giving nature a hand through restoration of structure and function. And this one is the longer session, so I ask the speakers to keep in the 10 minutes. I will interrupt you 2 minutes before your time ends. And I want to welcome Lisa Karn from Fragments of Hope with the theme, what do we mean by scaling up restoration and how do we measure it? Examples from Belize. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Healthy Reefs team, for inviting me to participate. Greetings, everyone from Placencia. I'm going to really rush through some of the background slides here so that we can get to the exciting recent work that we've done with Dr. Arthur Gleason with the diver-based mosaics, and even more recently with Dr. Steve Schill with using drones to quantify shallow coral reef cover. So the image here is one of our sites in Turnef in northern Belize. And you can also reach out to us through the website or email if I don't address one of your questions throughout this talk. Just for a little bit of background, since we began restoration, we've heard two different things. You can never get back to what it was, meaning, you know, pre-80s for the acropores with diseases. So the photograph, the black and white photograph here is from near Placencia from the 1970s, and the photo below it is from 2016, and that's all nursery grown outplanted acroporids at Laughing Bird Key National Park. The other argument we heard over 10 years ago was that staghorn and elkhorn lived in separate zones, but you can see clearly from the 70s photo, you know, they often lived together. The other take-home message from this talk is that the coastline protection is crucial for our restoration efforts, and that's one of the hardest things to really quantify and get at. So that is part of what's driving our shallow work from the beginning. I'm going to skip through this strategy slide, except to let you know that, you know, again, focusing on the shallow sites, thermally tolerant corals is how we source the more resilient mother corals. And just to drive home again, there's been some recent publications from Beck showing that it's really that top meter of reef that provides the coastline protection. And so again, that is where Fragments of Hope has been focusing all its restoration efforts over the last 10 years. So what do we mean by scaling up, and how do we even quantify what we're talking about? The restoration community still has a lot of work ahead of us because we don't have a lot of standardized vocabulary. So when we're talking about scale, we mean entire reef, do we mean sites, subsites, outplanted corals, the number of them versus the coverage. So as most of you know, the acroporids naturally fragment and spread out. So just counting corals can mean different things to different people and over different time frames. And not to harp on CRF, but recently I saw that they were saying that they had planted over 100,000 corals since '07, and then we've probably been the smallest organization and done over 150,000 corals. Again, what does that mean when we say number of corals? And some of you in the reef restoration realm may have seen a recent survey sent out where they asked, what is the area of reef have you attempted restoration? And the maximum was 1 hectare. So as a community, we haven't really been able to wrap our minds around past that area yet. So I'm not going to go into the indicators, that's a whole nother talk, but here's some more reference for scale. We've been mapping the Caribbean acroporids, all 3 taxa, over 10 years. So here's the whole Belize Reef. And then here is how we were trying to map just the work at Laughing Bird Key alone. And now we're in several other sites, but I'm going to focus on this one. It's the oldest site with the most data. So, we have all of our little sub-sites within Laughing Bird that we call a site, and we know that we've put over 82,000 corals, but what does that really mean, and how do we talk about it in a bigger sense? And we've been working on a lot of time series photographs, which are often powerful. This is a little busy, it goes counterclockwise. So this is 10 years, the same elkhorn coral. And you can see the difference in 10 years, it's pretty striking, but that is not quantitative. So beginning in 2014, and this is a busy slide, don't worry about too much of it. We started with Dr. Arthur Gleason doing diver-based photomosaics. And this is so we have them in 6 subsites of the over 32 at Laughing Bird. And we know how much corals we put out and when, and we do these mosaics every year. And the important point here is that we don't add anything else to these subsites once we began the diver mosaics, because we want to really quantify the changes over time. So hopefully this video shows, it's to give you an idea of what we're trying to capture. This is all nursery grown, outplanted acroporids at Laughing Bird Key National Park. This footage was all taken in 2019, and all these guys did really well throughout our severe bleaching event without bleaching at all, or if there was a few isolated ones that bleached, they recovered quite quickly. Let me pause this so I can keep going. So this is what one of the diver mosaics looks like when Arthur Gleason processes them for us, and it's reduced to share on the internet. So this is about 100 meters squared. This image is from 2014. We had outplanted about 209 staghorn corals in 2010. And in 2014, when we did the annotation, that was 18% of 22% total cover at this 100-meter site. And then here is what it looks like in 2019. Let me just show you that again. So that's 2014 and that's 2019. So again, it's powerful. And this is the only way we've been able to really quantify, because we annotate this with Coral Point Count software, what is the change in coral cover over time. So I'm gonna zip through this, even though I could talk a lot about it. This is the 6 photomosaic sites at Laughing Bird Key, keeping in mind that every year we do not add any more corals to the sites. So you can see these jumps that I've circled are all natural expansion of these acroporids, fragmenting, spreading out on their own. There was a dip in yellow, which was 2016 when we had Hurricane Earl, and it flattened some of the sites. We did not add anything back. And you can see in the green and the blue bars, it really jumped up again with a natural recovery. So this is phenomenal. But at the end of the day, this is only barely 700 meters squared. So we're looking at these really, honing in on these small 50 to 200 meters squared plots that we can quantify corals at. How can we go larger? So for example, one of the methods we've used is outplanting some ropes from the nurseries. The top left-hand corner was less than 40 little fragments outplanted with ropes and nails in 2010. And again, going counterclockwise, you have a time series image here. And today it won't even fit in the picture frame. And this is not in one of our quantified photo mosaic diver-based plots. So how do we capture this? How do we say, how much coral has really been replenished at Laughing Bird Key National Park? So last year we started working with Dr. Steve Schill, and thanks to his former student, Emily, who hand annotated what we're looking at here is everything in orange is all 3 acroporid taxa. all 3 taxa species, and everything in red is a combination of live coral and dead coral covered in sponges or zoanthids. And we were able to quantify the available substrate around Laughing Bird Key as being about 1 hectare. And when we did the math and finally found out that the replenished acroporids are over 2,000 meters squared, we can finally quantify and say that we have absolutely replenished 21% of this hectare of shallow fringing reef at Laughing Bird Key National Park. So this is an extremely powerful tool for us, and we are going to continue doing this across our multiple sites. And we're also using the drone shallow work to quantify. We'll be looking at this annually as well to quantify the changes over time. And we're also looking at using it for the natural acroporid stands that we source from for our replenished sites. I think I have time to.
You have 2 more minutes.
I have how much?
1 minute and 30 seconds.
Okay, great. I just wanted to show this little clip here at the end and invite you all, once it's healthy, once it's safe to do so, to come visit us. And I think this is a short video clip where I was just trying to give you an overview of, the scope of things. And then, how do we talk about what's going on at the benthic level? How do we talk about what's going on at the site level? And then finally at the reef level, and how are we going to use this information to come up with a national strategy for restoration in Belize that might be useful to others in the region as well. So I will end here and squeeze in my funder slide so that everybody gets credited. And again, invite you all to check out our website. We're on all social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. And once it's safe to do so, please come visit our sites, because only in person do you get the sense of what's really happening. Thanks again, guys.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It was very interesting. So now I give the mic to Kalina Cepeda from the Nature Conservancy with the theme "An Insurance for the Reef, How Creative Financing and First Response Can Help Reefs Facing Hurricanes." Thank you, Kalina.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to present an insurance for the reef and how creative financing and first response can help reefs facing hurricanes.
We cannot see your presentation, Kalina.
Okay, sorry. Can you see it now?
No.
I'm trying to share.
Have the share button at the bottom, and then you have.
Yes, I'm pushing it, but nothing happens. Can you see it?
Yeah, now it's there.
Okay.
You have to zoom in on presentation mode.
Sorry for that. Good afternoon, everybody. Today I'm going to present an insurance for the reef and how creative financing and first response can help reefs facing hurricanes. Coral reefs protect the coast from hurricanes, but in turn, hurricanes can cause severe damage to the coral reefs. About 17 to 60% of live coral cover can be lost in hurricanes with wind speeds from 110 to 160 knots. The strong winds of the hurricanes or tropical storms can cause powerful waves and also storm surge that can cause mechanical damage to the reef. Here we can see some overturned coral colonies. It can go from broken colony tips, where we can see in Tropical Storm Cristobal below, but also it can overturn the whole colony. So why it's important to address the impact of hurricanes in the reefs? Without any interventions, the corals can be dragged continuously by the current, and they can move around as projectiles or can be buried in the sand And these cause loss and abrasion of the tissue. We can see below in the right, a coral that was, all the tissue was damaged by abrasion in one hurricane, Hurricane Emily in 2004 in Mexico. So responding immediately after a hurricane can minimize the risk of subsequent damage. And this can be done through response and with activities as repairing the reef and also cleaning the reef from all the disaster debris that is carried out by the hurricane. So there are some components that are important for building a post-storm capacity in a country or in an area. And one is the governance, and because it is important to have a structure that provides leadership and effective coordination among stakeholders. Also, setting up regates. These are teams of experienced and well-trained divers or snorkelers and also supporting staff who is conducting in the water response and directly cleaning and also first responders. These are 4 snorkelers and also 6 divers. These can be tour operators, divers, reef managers, also fishermen from an area. But also it's important having the financing, and that's a combination of resources to ensure the annual preparation and also the implementation of the response. There are different sources of financing to cover the post-storm response. It can go from an entity that is responsible of managing the reefs. Also the reef beneficiaries as the tour operators or the hotel owners of the area. Also, it can be done by a national emergency fund or a coastal zone trust. But in this case, we present an insurance for the reefs, which is another source of financing that can also, we can consider. And in order to do things in an orderly manner, we propose a protocol that is a document that guides step-by-step actions that needs to be implemented. And here we have the early warning and rapid response protocol. This has 6 steps that are implemented before, during, and after the hurricane season. And there is a planning and preparation step, the early warning. This is when we have already a hurricane in the area, a rapid damage assessment, a primary response, secondary response, and also post-response actions. So why an insurance against hurricanes? Because to repair the reef, it can be costly. And also the cost can vary depending on the level of intervention. Here we have different levels of intervention. We have a primary response that has to be done at least 60 days after the cyclone in order to avoid that the tissue of the corals die or has more damages. So this involves reef cleanup to remove all the debris that is carried out by the hurricane, and also reef first aid, reattaching colonies, removing like colonies that are buried under the sand, stabilizing fragments. And also there's another level, which is secondary response. And this is stabilizing structural fractures and building also nurseries to place rescued fragments. And post-response actions, which involves reef restoration at different levels. So there's also some scenarios, like as scenarios that is low cost. It can be just doing the response, primary and secondary, and not doing restoration. Then another scenario, it's doing the response and doing a little bit of restoration. And then we have like more scenarios, and the most complete one is doing the response after the hurricane and then doing some ecological restoration. And in some areas where like maybe the reef, you know, the structure of the reef also was affected, there can be also do some structural restoration. So there's some estimated costs by scenario, and we have who's gonna pay then. Like in the basic scenarios, like we're talking about a few $1,000s, you know, maybe some beneficiaries and managers can pay that, you know. But then it comes, if the damage it's like very severe, that involves a lot of actions to mitigate the damage, then it's most costly. And then maybe some emergency funds can pay that. But if the damage is so severe that needs, you know, better scenarios, then an insurance can pay that kind of costs. There will also, there will always gonna be like some risk that is not covered because expenses are too big. So the types of insurance, there are compensatory insurance, and this is based on damages and loss. But for compensating costs for a natural asset can be difficult with a compensatory insurance because the time that it will take to evaluate the real damage, it will be so long, you know, that it's not feasible. But a parametric insurance, in other terms, this is a pre-agreed amount with certain conditions that need to be met. And it is designed for a quick payment that allows a quick response. So in this case, the insurance that we created, it's a parametric insurance. And this is defined by 3 elements: a parameter, a polygon, and a payout. So
you have 2 more minutes.
Thank you. So a parameter, when the wind speed within the polygon that was agreed, in this case, it needs to be above 100 knots. So we're talking about hurricanes category 3, 4, 5. And a polygon is the area that was pre-agreed, and this is where the event occurs and may cause damage to the insured asset. And the payout will vary because in the case that the wind speed is between 100 and 130 knots, then it's going to be a payout of the 40%. And then if it's like from 130 to 160 knots, it's going to be from 80%. And if it's more than 160 knots, it's going to be 100%. That's the maximum payout. The cost will serve to repair the good, and also they can serve, you know, to not only to do the response, but also to do some restoration after. And also they can compensate some of the services that are not provided while the asset is damaged. So in the case of Quintana Roo, Mexico, this is the first insurance that was implemented. Then this was bought by the Coastal Zone Management Trust. And this policy covered coral reefs and beaches in the Mexican Caribbean against hurricanes above 100 knots. There are 6 municipalities involved, and there is an insured polygon that you can see in the map. It covers a distance of 65 kilometers from the covered reefs. And you can see the area where the polygon is all the area. If there is a hurricane, you know, that goes in this polygon in any direction, but it crosses the polygon in at certain wind speed that is the one agreed in the policy, then the insurance pays out. It doesn't matter if there was damage or not, the policy has to pay out. But when does the insurance doesn't pay? When the agreed wind speed is not recorded inside the polygon.
Kalina, sorry, we ran out of time. If you can wrap up.
Yes, so thank you very much for your time. There are some my contacts and also my colleague Fernando Sequeira, who is the coordinator of the initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kalina. So we will wait for the questions till we finish with the last presenters. So now I give the mic to Stephen Canty from the Smithsonian Institution with the theme Mangroves, the Overlooked Ally Against Climate Change.
Thank you very much, Marisol. And thank you to the other presenters too. It's always nice to get a reminder of the great work being done in the region and the successes that are happening. So today I'm going to talk to you about mangroves, and what a lot of my colleagues have already been saying is how all of these systems are so connected, and therefore mangroves need to sort of be lifted up a little bit because of their importance generally as an ecosystem, but also their connectivity and how they help build resilience in other ecosystems against climate change and other factors. So just going to give you a little bit of a run through of why mangroves are so important as an ally against climate change. So firstly, they offer huge amounts of protection from storms. So Kalina's just talked about hurricanes, and if you have a fringe of 50 to 200 meters of mangrove, they really buffet the wind speeds, reduce wave action as well, and provide a lot of protection to coastal communities behind that. So, you know, this is the first step of, or one reason why they're very important. They also, during such events, provide protection from flooding and other storm events too. And in a global study, 2 of the 4 countries in the MAR were actually shown to have some of the greatest benefits provided by mangroves from flood protection, although the figures for Mexico are for the whole country and not just the MAR. It's important to show how important mangroves are as a whole to these countries. And this flood damage and storm damage is becoming more and more important as we see that we're predicted to have an increased frequency of high intensity hurricanes, which are sort of category 3 and above. So making sure that we have mangroves along these coastlines, protecting these coastal communities will be really key into the future. And we know that they can provide this protection. Moreover, we see the problems with sea level rise. We're predicted to have up to 1 meter increase in sea level by 2050. At the moment, mangroves are able to keep pace with sea level rise, so they're accreting sediments and therefore providing this protection to coastal communities, especially in these low-lying areas. So here's 3 key pieces of how they mitigate the impacts of climate change, but they can also mitigate climate change itself. And that is through the sequestration of carbon. So mangroves are sort of this amazingly unique ecosystem where they're able to remove CO2 or carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and not just store it in the body of the tree itself, but also in the sediments around. And here's myself with a colleague of mine, Lorraine Simpson, in a mangrove out in Belize. And just this top 50 centimeters of sediment, this is just full of mangrove peat, which has a high concentration of carbon and is sucking down all of this carbon dioxide, which is an important greenhouse gas. So mangroves have this ability to affect climate change both at a global level and also at a local level. So blue carbon is seen as this real key of how we can bring in mangroves as an ally for climate change mitigation and throughout the region, because this is the first time that we've really been, when we've been talking about ecosystem services, that we see that you can monetize that ecosystem service. And that is through initiatives such as REDD+, green payments, and nationally determined contributions. And supposedly this year, but actually now next year, we will be part of a team going out to Belize and creating estimates of the carbon in mangroves for the whole country so that we can provide a national estimate for their nationally determined contributions. And this is sort of a key way of getting some money in to help with protection, but also showing how it's important and actually what it gives back. And so that you can actually say protection actually has a value and how that value can then be used to further protect these systems themselves. So within the MAR, we actually have around 200, there's over 200,000 hectares of mangrove. And so if you scale this up with all of these forests, there's a huge potential for blue carbon all around the region. Although what we have seen is that since 1990 to 2010, we've lost approximately 30% of the mangrove cover in the region. So what was a big potential is now slightly less. Also, what other protections have we lost and what other ecosystem services have we lost? And this really brings us into restoration and the need to restore mangroves, and how do we link that in to other things that are going on in the region. So in Mexico, there's been some great advances by Sinvistav and UNAM, so Dr. Jorge Herrera and Dr. Claudia Tutli, of being restoring mangroves for a number of years, and not just through planting, but actually through secondary succession, which is improving the conditions of the hydrology of the sediments and then facilitating a more natural regeneration of the forests. So as part of that, what we need to do is not just think of this as individual pieces and individual forests. As my colleagues have shown earlier, and also some preliminary genetic results that we have, these forests are really highly connected. So how do we actually produce this as something that has a regional approach, whilst you can have local or national actions? So in August of 2018, with the Mesoamerican Reef Fund and CCAD, we led a participatory process of a 2.5-day workshop, which brought in 70 people from across the country, 4 countries, and a little bit further from beyond, so myself included, from the US. And it wasn't just bringing scientists or policymakers together, but it was bringing in all spectra of practitioners and stakeholders from the region, including the governments, NGOs, indigenous groups, academia, UNESCO, UNEP, and CLME+. And what happened over these days was we brought together what the priorities were for management and conservation of mangroves. And one of those things was, how do we scale up restoration, make it effective, and make sure that everybody's buying into something and doing it the same way? How do we get ecosystem adaptation, specifically for climate change, knowing how important mangroves are for in mitigating the impacts and also mitigating climate change as a whole at the global level? And then knowing this fact, it's how do we select indicators that can measure these successes? So right now we've launched the Regional Mangrove Strategy earlier this year, which focuses on the management, conservation, restoration, and monitoring of the system. It's a bit of a mouthful, but each of those pieces has this huge sort of innate meaning that's very succinct to different people and to different groups. So that's why it's got such a long title. And what this document does is basically it's a guidebook for management tools and mechanisms where we can look at blue carbon, we can look at restoration, we can look at protected areas and spatial management, and using that as something where we have a regional approach, but allows for differences in forests so that we know that a dwarf mangrove forest is not the same as a lagoonal system with tall mangroves. So it's allowing for these idiosyncrasies of each of the ecosystems, but making sure that overall people are working to the same overall plan. And right now we're working with the governments to see how this regional guide or strategy can help motivate national plans to work, knowing that they're working to this higher overarching objective. And then from that as well has been the creation of a regional restoration protocol. So we knew that restoration was key, and there was a bunch of different ways that it was being done around the region. So now we're actually sort of brought in, once again, it's not a step-by-step guide, but it's steps that you tick off to make sure that you have considered these factors, because planting of mangrove propagules or seeds or seedlings hasn't always been successful and isn't always needed. So by changing hydrology, by changing sediment conditions of these areas, you can actually just facilitate secondary restoration or secondary succession, which is the natural regeneration of a system through propagules that are floating around in the system coming from other populations. And that's actually really key to making sure that we maintain genetic diversity within these systems, which will then help with the systems themselves being able to adapt to climate change, but also making sure that the ecosystem services that they provide are those orientated to climate change. And as a support mechanism.
If you can wrap up, because we
Sure.
already ran out of time.
Perfect. So as a mechanism to support these initiatives, the Mesoamerican Mangrove and Seagrass Network was launched in 2018. It's just an extension of the extensive network and collaborators of the Healthy Reefs for Healthy People initiative. And basically it's an online discussion forum connecting people so that we can get science into decision-making, and also we can build a community of practice around restoration, blue carbon, and marine reserves. And right now we have over 90 individuals in over 35 institutions. So we're hoping that we can really use this as a system and as a tool to get regional approaches to management, restoration, and monitoring, and really bring up the importance of mangroves. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. So now we head to our last presentation from Nicole Craig, my colleague from Belize, and Melina Soto, my colleague from Mexico, with the theme From Parrotfish to King Crab, Multiple Approaches to Restore Herbivory in the Mesoamerican Reef. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Marisol. Here we are. So the fleshy macroalgae cover indicator is the common issue faced by our 4 countries of the Mesoamerican Reef, which is not doing great, as we have seen with Melanie earlier. And it has been for a while now. During the past decade, the fleshy macroalgae cover has more than doubled, while the coral cover is still very slow to recover and now faces even more challenges like the stony coral tissue loss disease. To fight back macroalgae and restore enabling conditions, we of course need to cut the entrance of nutrients like the first block presenters presented, but we also need to restore key environmental services, the herbivory. So Nicole and I, we will focus on parrotfish and king crabs, but please go and check our Healthy Reefs YouTube channel to see our diadema urchin recovery webinar, which was very interesting. So parrotfish protection began in our region with, once again, the lead of Belize in 2009. Indeed, the fisheries regulation included parrotfish protection and soon was complemented by the spear gun and fish traps restrictions. It was also accompanied by communication and education campaign targeted to fishers and general public, and was very well received. So the effect of this early decision is now showing. As you can see, the green line is the herbivorous fish biomass, and you can see it's increasing over the past years since the parrotfish protection, and it's coupled by a decrease of the fleshy macroalgae cover, the brown line. In 2010, the Bay Island Marine Park, which is Roatan, Utila, and Guanaja in Honduras, was created and included the parrotfish protection also in its management program. And it also prohibited the use of spur gun and fish traps. A few years later, in 2012, the wildlife refuge of Tela was also created, was beginning to be created, and is about to include also the parrotfish protection to its management plan, and it should be published very, very soon. So in this case, the herbivorous fish biomass also began to increase the green light, and with a stabilization also of fleshy macroalgae cover. Unfortunately, as you can see, last couple of years also have been very difficult politically in Honduras, and social unrest coupled with lack of enforcement have led to a dramatic decrease in this species biomass. Guatemala, after a series of public consultations and presentations with fishers and other stakeholders, decided to decree a 5-year ban for all parrotfish species in 2015. this year, 2020, and despite COVID, and based on the good results, but still critical levels of herbivorous fish in Guatemala, they decided to not only renew for another 5 years the ban, but for this time to also include surgeonfishes, butterfly, and angelfish. And this time again, we can see an increase of the parrotfish biomass and a stabilization of fleshy macroalgae, although it's still very slow levels. Last but not least, in Mexico. So after years of communication and communication campaigns and collaboration work, in 2018, CONAM created the Mexican Caribbean Biosphere Reserve, which covers a great part of Quintana Roo's territorial seas. And it includes in its management program the parrotfish protection and also gear restrictions. And very shortly after that, after submitting ecological evaluation studies and a great collaboration between the wildlife direction from the government and several local NGOs, 10 species of parrotfish from the Caribbean have been added to the protected species list of Mexico, which is basically the highest level of protection a species can get. Of course, we still don't have the results of biomass combined with the fleshy macroalgae for that loss because it has been passed last year, but it's very encouraging. So the Mesoamerican Reef is the first to protect parrotfish at a regional level using a large array of available legal tools like management program, fisheries, laws, bans, protecting species, etc. But we are seeing that without the involvement of local communities and proper enforcement, it will not go very far. So now let's discover more creative and hands-on way to restore herbivory with Nicole.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to discuss the creative solutions that we've been working on to fight macroalgal proliferation in Belize and in the Mar using the Caribbean king crab. This crab is a herbivore, and so a lot of work has been done over the years to test the herbivory potential on reefs. And so our projects in Mexico and Belize are based on work done by Mark Butler, Angela Mojica, and Jason Spadaro, just to name a few. And we are now working with Jason in both Belize and Mexico as we move on to the next phase of our projects. And all our collaborators are listed below, and they've been very instrumental in our success thus far. Next. Next, yes. We first had to demonstrate the herbivorous potential of the Caribbean king crab. So pilot studies were conducted in both Belize and Mexico, in which crabs were translocated to small patch reef areas within no-take zones of marine protected areas. And in Belize, especially, there was active coral restoration in the area. Herbivorous potential was measured using benthic transects over a period of a few months to look at the difference we'd see on how effective the crabs were at removing algae. Next. Mexico saw a reduction in turf algae and increase in CCA after 6 months. This is at the experimental site, which is on the right, which is indicated by that red crab on top. And on the left, you see the controls graphs, which you don't see that big difference after 6 months. Next. Belize also saw a reduction in fleshy macroalgae and an increase in CCA as well. And these pilot studies guided our way forward, and we recognized some limitations that we had in Belize, for example, the number of crabs that we could find to use in the experiment, the sizes of crabs we use in the experiment. So if we could produce our own stock of crabs, we'd be able to explore some of the effects of herbivory while changing a few variables like density or size when we translocate. Next. So the question was if we could reproduce them. And this had been done before in the Caribbean a few decades ago. So using that work by Walter Eddy and some recent research, we attempted here with some adaptations where necessary. Next. In Mexico, the experiment uses the INAPESCA facilities. So they're kept in tanks that are 3 meters in diameter on open circuits using filtered seawaters, and they're shaded as well. And so this setup has 1 male and 5 female crabs, all sourced from local fishermen. And then to recreate their natural environment, there are many hiding spaces. They found creative ways to feed the crabs since the algae does not grow naturally in the tanks. And they use screen cages to isolate the buried females that will contain the larvae. Next.
You have 2 more minutes, Nicole.
Things are a bit simpler in Belize. We are currently set up in Tobacco Key. The crabs are kept in gabion baskets, originally intended for the construction of retaining walls. But they work perfectly for this project. The difference here is that it's completely open, so depth and temperature and water movement fluctuate a lot, and that can make it more challenging. But it constantly provides us the opportunities to better define and replicate our methods. Placement in Tobacco Key also gives us an excellent opportunity to begin to engage the fishermen and the community, because another long-term goal of the project is to be able to teach fishermen how to grow the crabs as a way to provide a more steady source for the translocation to reefs, as well as for alternative income. Next. And then a snapshot of what we are seeing so far from buried female to juvenile crabs, that process. These are from the Mexico project. And so we see that this process takes about a month. And once they're buried, the eggs are near bright, very bright purple, I should say. And then over the course of a month, while the yolk is being consumed and the eggs are developing, you see they become lighter in color, which is a very good visual indicator that they are almost ready to hatch. Next. Mexico's project has made 4 attempts so far at raising juveniles, 3 of which have been successful and have crabs alive today. They have a total of 59 crabs. So after they hatch for about a month, they're actually relatively invisible. You don't see them. And so they coined this as the leap of faith phase, where you have to just wait and trust that they're there. And then eventually when they become visible and begin to eat algae, you'll begin to notice how many you actually have. They don't need to be fed during that time. So again, it's just patience and understanding that this is going to happen. And after this, they will begin eating algae. They're ranging in size based on the 59 that they have, but the largest one after 5 months is about 5 centimeters. So what we're doing now is looking to see how we can do this more efficiently. And so for Mexico scaling up, a clutch could have about 2,000 eggs at least, and they've done this 4 times, but have 50 surviving. So what's the key to better survivorship? And so their response is to try and better understand the critical early juvenile stages. And in Belize, under very different conditions, we're still working on eggs and trying to determine the most logical reason why the crabs aren't mating the way we would like, and then address it. We do have a buried female that was caught that way, and so we're hoping that within a few weeks we could have some larvae. And we do have the list of lessons learned from Mexico. So if we are at that point, our juveniles may have better odds. We're also looking into the possibility of trying in a closed system here as well. But at the end of the day, we want to master the low-tech mariculture technique because it will ensure that fishermen involvement is more inclusive. Next. Lastly, we have tremendous support from our partners involved in the project. And so with continued collaboration, we hope that we'll be able to answer a lot more questions soon and have a much more positive update for you the next time that you hear on this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies. Great presentation. So we have some questions, and I will start with Lisa. And Lisa, I think we will need your presentation again, because the first question from Elizabeth Hogan is if you are willing to show the slide with the indicators so we could get a quick look.
Sure. Can you hear me? Can you see the screen? These success indicators I kind of made up a little bit. So I just added another slide for you here. If you look on the bottom, this is a reference to any ecosystem restoration from 2015. So it wasn't specifically for coral reefs, but for any mangroves, seagrass, whatever. And so these 4 guidelines are also what informs us as we look at more detailed success indicators for coral restoration I can certainly send any more information by email if you like.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And I have two more for you from Victoria Barker. Great work in Laughing Bird Key. And are you planning to expand to other stony coral species?
Thank you. Yes, from 2009, we've also been working with about 8 or 10 other stony coral species. And we were just about to really ramp up the effort using a new microfragmenting technique that we adopted from Dr. David Vaughn. We don't have any land-based nurseries, so everything we do is direct outplanting or in water nurseries. And we do have some trial data we could share with you with pillar corals, Anilaris, Favillata, some of the brain corals, but we're kind of paused right now because of stony coral tissue loss, which has been identified in northern Belize. So as a nation, we're experimenting with, you know, what we can do to rescue some of these other species without land-based nurseries and how we can move forward with our restoration efforts. So we kind of paused. We're still doing small amounts, small trial amounts of these other species directly outplanted.
Thank you, Lisa. I have one more for you from Elizabeth Gomez. Great work on reef restoration. I am just wondering how many coral colonies became sources of your fragments. Also, do you also use sexual propagation in growing your corals?
For the first question, it's a long answer. So we've been mapping in Belize for over 10 years. For example, at Laughing Bird Key National Park, we know, I think it's between 20 and 30 different palmata host genets that we have, because we do genetics as well on all of the corals that we source and propagate. And I think it's around over 14 different staghorn. So we have maps of our source locations for these corals that, again, I could share with you in a different format. And the second question was, and that's just for Laughing Bird. So we have additional sites where all of our mother donors are mapped out and we do the genetics on those. The second question was?
Do you also use sexual propagation in growing your corals?
No, we do not. We do not have land-based nurseries. However, we have documented spawning of all 3 acroporid taxa 2014 through 2019. And we did publish on that, one of our few publications with Ileana Baums. And we are in discussion about perhaps using what they just renamed from larval pools to cribs. Let me see if I can remember what cribs stand for. But it's basically Secor has come up with a method to collect larvae and sort of babysit them in the in situ environment, but protected in just what it sounds like a big inflatable pool. So that's kind of a long story, but we're in discussion with looking at how we can experiment with that for other remote regions that may not have access to land-based nurseries to do the sexual propagation.
Thank you, Lisa. And the next question is for Kalina from Phil Carp. The parametric insurance policy for the reef area in Quintana Roo is indeed innovative. Are there initiatives to replicate this in other areas where there are private actors that benefit from ecosystem services provided by coral reefs, mangroves, or seagrass beds?
Yes, there are some initiatives to get insurance for other countries in the Mesoamerican Reef, as Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras, and also for some other sites in Mexico that are not covered by the current policy. But these are just for coral reefs, not for other natural assets at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And I have a last question for Nicole from Tatiana Becker. What are the natural levels of king crabs found in Belize reefs?
Oh, that is actually a study that we need to do. It's on a part of the bigger plan is to assess the baseline data that's, sorry, we have an entire, oh my gosh. We have an entire plan for the king crabs, which started collecting baseline data and then as translocating them to the reefs. Or a pilot study was limited to just that. And then we have not moved to that point as yet, but within the near future, we are getting funds to conduct that experiment in several locations. So we actually have on the docket to do that same experiment right here at Tobacco Key where experiments located. To expand beyond that area is also something that we intend on doing. So I am unable to tell you that figure at the moment.
Thank you, Nicole. So there are not more questions in the chat box. There are a lot of congratulations for all the speakers. I will say goodbye. If everybody wants to turn on their camera to say goodbye. Thank you to all the speakers that they made this possible, to the solutions for the Mesoamerican Reef. And I will pass on the mic to Francisca for the closing remarks. And thank you for all the attendees for your interest in this webinar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you as well to Healthy Reefs for giving these awesome talks. And definitely inspiring to see that it works out in some places to have really cool solutions. And I hope we can use those solutions and put them into work in other places as well. And we have 2 more things on the program today for Global Coral Reef Week. At 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have our last plenary by Judy Lang on why she still has hope. And then at 4:15 to 6:15, we have our trivia to conclude the week of live events in a fun and exciting way. Hope to see all of you there.
Thank you, Francesca. Great job.
Everybody.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.